Alrighty. Hi, everyone. My name is Tessa Barron, and I am our Disaster Preparedness Program Associate at SVP. And today we're going to be taking some time to talk about different types of actions that can be taken at the household level to get us prepared as we approach tornado season. Before we get started, I'm just going to cover one or two quick housekeeping items and then we'll jump into our content. But first, I just want to let everyone know that our webinar today is going to get recorded. So in the event that you do have to jump early, I'll be following up with some of the resources that I'm talking about, with a quiz that I'll review in just a moment here, and then also with the webinar recording. So again, if you have to jump early, no worries there. We'll be sharing some resources. And second, if you have any questions as I'm going through, you can feel free to go ahead and drop those in the Q&A box, and I'll do my best to get to them as we're presenting, but we also will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation today, so we'll circle back to those then if I'm unable to get to that in the session. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. And I'm going to begin with just a brief overview of SDP for any folks on the call that may be unfamiliar with who we are and what we do. SVP is a disaster resilience and recovery nonprofit, and we got our start after Hurricane Katrina, so about 2 decades ago at this point. Originally, we operated solely as a rebuilding organization, but since then, we've really expanded our scope and what we do, and now we work across the entire disaster spectrum. You can see here on the slide that our mission at SVP is to shrink the time between disaster and recovery, and we do that by scaling innovations and sharing lessons learned, and importantly, by continuing to educate all stakeholders. You can also see here that we have our work categorized into 5 main buckets, and that right in the center is our preparedness program. And again, I work in our preparedness program, and we'll be talking all things tornado preparedness this afternoon. So I just want to share briefly a little bit about our preparedness program before we get into the content. I wanted to share that our main goal here is to get in front of as many different types of audience sets as possible. And so that includes homeowners and renters, businesses, public officials, nonprofits, to equip them with the knowledge and capacity to make more informed disaster preparedness decisions. Ultimately, what we're trying to do here is work towards building communities that are disaster resilient. And that really does start with getting folks as prepared as they can be. So how do we do that? Well, very briefly, I'll just share that in our Prepare program, we have a wide variety of different resources that folks can use to take actions. So that includes things like checklists and written guides, videos, in-person trainings, webinars like today. And these are all housed on our website. So if you're interested and you want to take a look to learn a little bit more, I highly encourage you to do so once we wrap up today. And lastly, before we get into this, we do ask that you please consider taking just a few minutes to complete our survey. It's really helpful in giving us a lot of direction as we think about what's most helpful for you and get feedback about what else you'd like to learn. And I'll also share that if you are able to go ahead and complete the survey, and if you do it within 24 hours, you will be entered into a raffle for a $25 gift card. So, we hope that's a good incentive. And again, we'd really appreciate any feedback that you could share with us. So I'd like to start us off today with a story of a tornado survivor. And this is a story of a guy named Larry from Springfield, Massachusetts. And we chose this story because it highlights some really important key takeaway points that we want you to take home with you once we wrap up today. In 2011, Larry faced a tornado event that was really pretty rare for the area. And in fact, many folks didn't actually even think that the event was going to happen. But as you can see here, around 4 p.m., Larry did receive a tornado warning, and that warning did state that the tornado was coming directly his way. Larry and his family looked outside and they noticed that the sky was changing color. It was turning a sort of greenish brown hue. And he noticed also that the wind was really picking up. So thankfully, Larry knew what to do. He and his family took shelter downstairs in their basement, and they did end up being okay. Unfortunately, his neighbor wasn't as lucky. Her home did sustain very severe damage from a tree that was in front of her property that split in two and that landed on her home. Now, again, we start with this story because there are some very important lessons to be learned here. And the first is knowing your risks. We'll get into this a little bit more, but to start, our risks are changing. So, areas that haven't been impacted by certain weather events now are facing an unprecedented risk. The second is staying plugged into information sources like your local news, weather channel. NOAA's has a great tornado watch, despite any skepticism that you have about, whether or not you really think the disaster is likely to occur. Larry knew to take shelter immediately once he saw the warning signs of a tornado, like again, the sky color and the cloud type, etc. So this is information that we really want to make sure that you're equipped with so you know how to stay safe and so you know what you're looking for. And then also, again, important to seek shelter immediately and after the storm to have a plan in place to check up on your neighbors to make sure that everyone's okay. And lastly, I'll share that, in light of what happened with Larry's neighbor, it's really critical to take actions in advance, like pruning trees and cutting off branches of trees that are nearby your home in advance of a tornado or high wind event. And that's because when we're talking about these high wind events, if trees are going to fall, they're going to get pulled in the direction of their heavier side. So we want to make sure that we're avoiding any damage that's going to result from that. So a very important story that we're sharing to get us started off today. So now we're going to get into the bulk of our content, and we're going to talk about 5 key preparedness actions. And the first is knowing our risks. Unfortunately, we are in a period of time that's characterized by these weather events that are very extreme and they're frequent and they're pervasive, and we can't stop them. And we certainly can't slow them down, but what we can do is everything in our power to get as prepared as we possibly can to stay safe. Now, today we're focused on tornadoes and tornado safety, but I do want to just take a brief step back and share that our risks are changing for various type of disaster events. And our top recommendation at SBP to get properly prepared is to take a look at this really great tool called riskfactor.com. And this is a tool that's going to provide you with your individual risk scores for wildfire and extreme heat, extreme wind, and flood events. So it's going to give you a really great picture of the different types of events that you should be planning for. So we always like to start with that. Now, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page with some of our tornado basics before we really get into the bulk of the content. Tornadoes are rotating columns of air that start at the base of a thunderstorm and extend all the way down to the ground. And as I just mentioned, our risks are changing of when different disasters occur. So no matter where you are throughout the country, you need to be prepared for tornadoes. Typically, we see tornadoes happening during the summer months, but it's very important to know that tornadoes can occur at any time of the year, and they're going to last from a period of just a few minutes to several hours. So pretty different of what we're looking at, different types of events. We don't know how long they're going to last, so we need to be prepared for this range, this duration. These storms are so dangerous because they can severely disrupt our electricity and our lines of communication. And that means that it's really all too important to have a plan to communicate with our loved ones in advance of a storm. And briefly, before moving on here, I want to just take a moment to review this term called tornado alley that you may or may not have heard of before, just to clear up any confusion with the term. Tornado Alley refers to a broad area in the central part of the country that deals with, high occurrence of tornado events. And this is a nickname that can certainly be misleading because tornadoes can and do happen in all 50 states. So again, tornadoes do occur outside of Tornado Alley every single year. So even if you're not located in that region, it's still critical that you are prepared and that you're thinking about tornadoes as a risk that could, be something that you have to deal with. The next thing is that it's critical to stay plugged into information sources. We want to be aware of incoming hazards. So, for example, if we need to evacuate or shelter in place or get off the roads, we can do so in time, which is going to help us stay safe. We encourage you to pay attention to weather reports and listen for emergency information and other alerts. And also, if your community has one, to sign up for your community warning system in advance of a tornado. We also always like to emphasize, and if you could see my mouse here, I'm circling the NOAA, the weather radio, and that's so important because this is battery powered. So if you lose power, given that this is a battery powered information source, you'll still be able to get plugged in, and so you'll know what's happening around you despite loss of power. So something to keep in the back of your mind. Most critically for tornadoes, when there's a warning, that means that a tornado is occurring or it's imminent. And so you really need to find shelter right away if you do receive a tornado warning. However, I do also want to emphasize that a tornado watch still needs to be taken very seriously because watches do mean that you need to proceed with caution. A tornado is possible and it's likely to occur. So we want to make sure that in the event that it does occur, you have what you need and you're able to stay safe. So both, again, are important alerts to be aware of, but warnings are what we want to take the most seriously because that means that a tornado is occurring, it is imminent, and again, we want to seek shelter as soon as possible. So now we're going to shift gears and talk about making a preparedness plan. When we're talking about emergency planning basics, that involves a few things. First is making sure that you have supplies in your home in advance. And we'll walk through some specifics in just a moment here of certain items that you want to make sure you have on hand. Next is having a plan in place to communicate with your loved ones and having, for example, a battery powered radio like that NOAA radio that we just mentioned, so that you can keep on getting updated with information in case you lose power. And then lastly, our emergency planning basics includes making a plan for either seeking shelter at home or evacuating to a shelter if you have time, or evacuating to the home of a neighbor or a loved one that really shouldn't be alone during this type of disaster event. But again, I want to emphasize that's only if you have time to do that safely. There are also some really great resources on our SDP website that are going to walk you through making a larger plan if you're interested and want to check that out, because we're just going to be going over the basics today. And again, the guides on our website are going to offer much more detail. So when we think about what types of supplies to gather, I want to just call your attention to a few things in particular. When it comes to food and bottled water, it's recommended that you have a gallon of water per person each day. And this does include having enough water for any pets that you have in your family too. And we're looking at ideally a stock of about 2 weeks worth of food and water. We also encourage you to think through any specific needs that your family may have. So maybe there are babies, infants, young children in your family that have special needs, or maybe you or your family members have certain medications or prescriptions that you want to make sure you have on hand. So understanding again that this is a list of our basic necessities, but that there certainly might be things that your family needs to make sure that you are safe and protected and that you have what you need during a disaster. I also want to emphasize here that we've highlighted protective gear and bike helmets as important items to have in your list. And that's because, again, and you'll hear me say this multiple times, that tornadoes and high wind events, they can cause things like dangerous projectiles. They can cause severe damage to buildings in the aftermath of a storm. So it's crucial that you have what you need to stay physically protected during a storm or in the aftermath of a tornado when you're recovering and once the storm finally passes. So very important things to consider that are tornado specific are again having the gear that you need to put on your body and to have for your family as well. We know that preparing for disaster events can certainly be a challenge, but it's so much better to take steps to buy different items in advance because disasters can be so much more costly when they do occur. So if you're on a tight budget, we just offer a couple approaches here, like spreading out your purchases. And these are really key to pulling together your kits in an affordable way. You can also take a look at getting some of your items at cost savings stores near you or your local secondhand stores. That can be super helpful. and taking a look to see if your state participates in sales tax holidays. And also if your state is a participating state, what are those different tax-free days? And that can certainly be a great time to plan out getting those larger big ticket items for cheaper prices. It's definitely also worthwhile to reach out to your local community organization, local community management departments to see if they have any items that you might be missing from your kit. So just a couple suggestions on how you can pull together your kits in a way that is affordable and makes sense for your budget. Now, I'm not going to go into too many details here, but there are a couple items that I want to highlight. Now, we just spent some time talking about your emergency supplies and a couple of key items to have in your kit. And the bottom line here is that we want to have these items prepared now because we never know when a disaster is going to strike. And this really is especially important with tornadoes because they can happen instantaneously. The average warning time for a tornado is about 13 minutes, but tornadoes can strike with absolutely no warning at all. So because of that, again, critical to have these items on hand year round. Another key part of an emergency plan is identifying the safest room in your house to take shelter. And I'll walk through what we're looking for and later on in the presentation. We've talked about staying plugged into information sources. We've talked about being aware of the certain tornado warning signs and what to look for. And I also want to emphasize here that, we know that our lines of communication might go out. So making a plan with your neighbors for how you'll stay connected, how you'll help one another, and how you'll share resources is crucial. So moving along here to making a recovery plan. This is an important key piece of the preparedness puzzle. And that's because your financial preparedness underpins all aspects of recovery. So we really want to make sure that you're thinking about these things in advance. So I'm just going to go through this briefly here. But a couple tips are going around your home in advance, taking pictures, taking videos of the structure of your home itself, but also of your belongings. And what you're doing when you're taking these pictures and videos is you're creating a home inventory, which is really great to have in your recovery. And also taking a look at important documents, collecting them, organizing them, and protecting them physically in waterproof folders, and also getting them uploaded online for double protection is a good measure to take. We encourage you to save for your deductibles and also just to have savings on hand if possible, because you may find yourself in a situation where you're running into unexpected costs in your recovery post event, like the cost of clearing debris, for example. And then lastly, just very quickly, taking a look at your homeowners or renters insurance policies, seeing what you do have coverage for, seeing what gaps in your coverage may exist. And that's going to go a long way in making sure that you're financially prepared. So moving along to our last set of topics here is preparing your home. And we're going to look at how to prepare our home. We're going to look at some quick tips in 3 different categories. And the first is inspections and maintenance. And this is true across the board for all the disasters we talk about at SBP. If you're proactive in keeping your home in good repair, you will save money in the long run because it's going to enable you to catch things quickly, early on, and really before they get very costly. Second, we'll look at securing a home and different steps that can be taken pre-storm to reduce damage. And then lastly, different considerations for fortifying a home. So again, with our inspections and maintenance, the idea here is we want to catch issues early on and before they get very costly. So some quick actions are testing your smoke alarms, your carbon monoxide detectors. And, like we talked about before, pruning, thinning trees, removing branches that face your home. And this is going to help us avoid any tree toppling during a storm that could cause damage to your property. We also have listed out here some actions that you may want to bring in a professional. So things like inspecting your walls, wall studs, your roof, to really make sure that everything is securely attached. Because again, tornadoes and other high wind events, that's going to be problematic if again, the structure of our home is not very sturdy. And then also bringing in a professional to fill any cracks in your home's exterior in advance is important to do as well. When we're talking about securing our home, there are certain actions that we absolutely can take in advance of a storm to reduce the damage of a tornado. So this is going to include things like going around your home, taking a look at your outdoor furniture and securing that in advance, and also going ahead and removing any debris or other loose items that may become dangerous projectiles in an event. Another very quick and easy action that you can take before a tornado is closing all interior and exterior doors and windows. Again, we know that tornadoes can happen without warning. So knowing in advance, this is a part of your plan. If we receive a tornado warning, we're keeping up to date with our alerts and we do see that one is imminent, knowing that this is an action that needs to be taken immediately, it's also important. And then when we're talking about different actions to secure our home, we also have some more advanced actions that, again, could just be a good idea to bring in a professional to get some additional help. So, with things like securing larger appliances and top heavy furniture so they don't fall over, because that could certainly cause damage, rearranging furniture so it's out of harm's way, and then also just making sure that you're storing your heavier and your larger items on lower shelves, again, to avoid damage from any type of toppling. And then the last bucket here is fortifying our home. And fortifying our home will keep it as protected as can be during the different types of storms that we're talking about today. At SBP, we are huge proponents of upgrading to fortified roofs. And when I send the follow up email today with the webinar recording, I will certainly be sure to send a link if you're interested in learning more about what fortified roofs are and why they are so beneficial to safeguarding a home against a high wind event. But there are other types of fortifying measures that you can bring into your home as well, like hurricane clips, installing impact resistant storm shutters, upgrading to storm impact windows, or even just attaching storm shutters to your existing windows. Again, I know I'm going through this pretty quickly here, but I do encourage you to check out SBP's Tornado e-learning, which is going to go into a lot of depth. It's going to offer a lot of details of different ways that you can fortify your home. And in addition to sending this link of Fortified, I'm going to go ahead and send that e-learning in that follow-up email as well, so you can take your time to go through the different measures that can be taken to fortify a home. And then lastly here, it's very important to talk about what actions can we take in a disaster, depending on where we're located when we receive that alert, that are going to help keep us safe. So just quickly here, if you are home and you receive an alert that a tornado is coming, the best course of action to take is to seek shelter immediately. That's going to be either in your basement, maybe you have a tornado safe room, or if not, any interior room in your home on the lowest floor is going to be your best bet. A couple key considerations are we want this spot to be away from windows. We want to make sure that you are not directly under any heavy objects like a bed or a piano or a large piece of furniture on the floor above. And then, if possible, getting under something that's very sturdy, like a table or a workbench, and covering your head is the best course of action. Most importantly, and this goes back to why it's so critical to stay plugged into information sources. We want to make sure that you're following instructions from your local authorities. And then lastly here, should you find that you're in a car when you receive any type of tornado alert, it's of utmost importance that you drive to a shelter if possible. If not, I want to emphasize this, you should absolutely not try to outrun a tornado. Outrunning a tornado is the most dangerous approach that you can take if you are caught in your car during an event. If you are in your car and if you cannot get to a shelter, the next best thing to do is either get down in your car, cover your head, or seek shelter at a nearby rest stop or other sturdy building. Or, and this is the worst case scenario, but certainly better than trying to outrun a storm, is seeking shelter, ditching your car and seeking shelter in a low lying area and lying flat on your back. Be sure that if, again, if you're in your car, that you're avoiding any underpasses, bridges, and areas with many trees. And lastly, here we know that that power outages can happen with any type of tornado event. So it's definitely something that we want to keep in the forefront of our minds. what actions can be taken prior to a storm when it comes to preparing for a power outage. So we have a couple things listed out here, like unplugging your appliances and electronics, having a backup power source at the ready, should that be a generator, making sure that you are aware of generator safety, and specifically for tornadoes after an event, steer clear of any fallen power lines that might have been impacted from a storm. So with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Our key actions here are knowing your risks, taking a look at riskfactor.com, going through the exercise of making a preparedness plan using SBP's guide as guidance as you're pulling together yours, taking different actions to protect your home, and knowing what you need to do to stay safe, whether you're at home or you're on the road when a tornado comes. And lastly, I'm just offering a reminder, if you do have a moment to take our survey and you wouldn't mind, we would really greatly appreciate that. And again, you'll be entered into a raffle to receive a gift card if you are able to send that survey response our way within 24 hours. And again, we really would appreciate any feedback that you might be able to offer. So with that, we'll wrap up, and I know we're just about at time, but if any folks have questions, please feel free to either drop them in the Q&A box or to unmute yourself, and I'll stay on a few extra minutes in case anyone would like to chat about tornado preparedness in more depth. So with that, if any folks have questions, please feel free.
Thanks, Tessa. And again, we shared the survey link in the chat, so please fill out our post-training survey there. Tessa, as we wrap up here, a question for you. Whether you're thinking about tornado preparedness or preparedness for other events, what is one of your top pieces of advice you try to give everyone if they're trying to start taking some form of preparedness action?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I know that sometimes preparedness can feel a little bit daunting. There are a lot of steps. And what I would say is the first thing to do is talk with your family or your roommates, or maybe you live alone, and just start going through the process of pulling together your emergency plan. Whatever disaster event you're dealing with can be very hectic. So just understanding in a disaster, here are my first steps. I've planned out in advance exactly what I need to do first. That's just going to help the event be a little bit more predictable. And that could be anything that we've talked about today, whether your first steps are making sure that you have a kit, or whether your first steps are understanding what the safest room in your house is. Having a plan in place is exactly where I would start, because again, that would help the event be as predictable as it could possibly be.
No other questions in the chat at this time.
All right, well, then in that case, I will stay on again for a few extra minutes if anyone does have any questions, but we really appreciate you joining us today. And please be on the lookout for a follow-up email with the resources that we talked about and the webinar recording. Thanks so much.